Angular 14 introduced an amazing new feature, standalone components. And over the next minutes, I will explain what exactly standalone components are, why this feature was added, how it works, and which problem is solved by it. And we'll explore basic standalone components along with more advanced use cases like using standalone components with services, routing, or lazy loading. I want to highlight right away though that this feature was introduced with Angular version 14 in preview mode. So as a feature preview. This means it's not fully stable yet. Details might change. It's not the recommended way for building production Angular applications, and that's why my complete guide course does not use standalone components as a default, but it's very possible that standalone components will shape the future of Angular and might become the default way of building Angular components and apps once all the details have been finalized, once everything has been polished, and once this feature has been battle tested and is the recommended default. It's not the case right now, but it's still really interesting to dive into this feature and play around with it, and that's therefore what we'll do over the next minutes. Now, to understand what exactly standalone components are and which problem is solved by them, I prepared a basic demo project which you find attached to this video. Now, this is a standard Angular project, nothing spectacular about it. What's important though is that this project uses Angular version 14 or higher. What I teach you will also work with higher versions. Here I'm using the release candidate because I'm recording this before version 14 stable was released, but of course everything I explain is true for the stable version as well. I also again want to emphasize that this is not the only way of building Angular. Instead, it's a preview feature, so you should use ng modules, you should use everything I taught you in my complete guide course. This might become the future of Angular though. Maybe some details will change, we'll see in the future. But what exactly are standalone components and which problem is solved by them? Well, for this, let's take a look at this demo application. It is a very simple application in the end, but it does have a couple of components. It does have a custom directive and a service and a shared module where I make this directive available to all other modules that are interested. I got my app module where I'm declaring various components, where I'm importing the shared module so that these components can use the directive exported and declared in that shared module. And then in those components which I have, I'm using the other components. So in the app component, I'm using the welcome component. In the welcome component, I'm using the details component. And in the details component, I'm using my custom directive. And I'm also using my service. And if you would install all the dependencies with npm install, and you then would start the development server with ng-serve, then you would get an application that looks like this. And please note that the navigation won't work yet. We'll add routing in a couple of minutes. But then if you open the console, you'll also note that if you click on this area here at the bottom, those clicks are registered because of our service. You see the custom directive in action here. It highlights this last paragraph. And it is a standard Angular app therefore. However, standard apps like this, and all Angular apps in the end, can have one problem. There's quite a lot of boilerplate code you have to write. You specifically have to add all these modules, like the app module or the shared module, to organize and declare your directives and components, to import and export modules into each other. And whilst this is not really difficult, it can be annoying. It's a lot of boilerplate code you have to write, it's a lot of extra work, and it can make refactoring rather difficult. And it's of course not something you have to do in other libraries or frameworks like React. Now, Angular needs those modules internally. It needs to know which components are available in which other component and so on. And that's why this feature exists. It's not there to make your life more difficult. Instead, it's needed internally by Angular. Nonetheless, it would be nice if we could get rid of these ng modules, and it turns out that this is exactly what standalone components will achieve. The Angular team worked hard to build a way of using Angular that allows us to get rid of ng modules, to use standalone components and standalone directives instead, which don't need to be declared in some module. And the best part is that this new mode, which is in preview right now, can be mixed with the old way or the current way of building Angular apps. So you can mix standalone components and directives and so on with ng modules, as you will see over the next minutes. So that's the problem. We have this boilerplate code and we want to get rid of it. How can we now use those standalone components though? Well, let's build our first standalone component here at the example of the details component. This is a regular component which is declared in the app module. Now we want to convert it to a standalone component so that we can see how we can build such standalone components.